Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. Have you ever wondered how to take your favorite Bible verses and turn them into beautiful pieces of art? In this video, I'm going to share 4 simple tips that will help you lay your verse out so that you can use it in wall art, cards, or even your own journal. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. I chose this verse because it's a beautiful reminder to me of God's goodness and mercy in my life. But it also makes a perfect verse for the fall season, as we anticipate Thanksgiving and turn our hearts to the Lord in gratitude for his many blessings in our lives. Let's go ahead and get started. I've created a free PDF download if you would like to follow along and you prefer to trace instead of draw. You can find that download in a link in the description below. Now, before I get started on my tips today, I wanted to give a quick disclaimer and say that when I do my scripture writing in the morning as part of my devotions, I like to keep it simple. I don't always lay things out very perfectly. I pay attention to maybe enlarging some of my printing or my writing, changing up the fonts. And as you can see, some verses are just in my normal cursive. And even when I do a slightly fancier project like this, I don't pay attention to measuring or anything like that. I really try and keep it low key. I don't want it to become an exercise in perfectionism or have to spend a lot of time on the technical aspects of it. I really like to just be creative and just enjoy the time in the Word. Think about what I'm writing, think about the words. And so it's pretty low key. However, there might be times you want to lay things out a little bit more neat, have things a little bit more measured, whether that's for wall art that you want to put in a frame, or maybe you just want to be able to put something like prop it up in your room, whether it's on a shelf or somewhere you can see it throughout your day, then the tips I'm going to share with you today are perfect for that. Tip number 1 is to use graph paper. This is so good for being able to help yourself with your spacing. What you can start with is just grabbing a piece of your graph paper and do some little thumbnails like I've done here. And so I haven't even written the whole verse yet, but you can just play with these tiny little boxes and do the verse several times and think about where you want to lay things out. It's a good time to think about what words you're going to do larger or smaller. When you look at my final example here, you can see which words I chose to kind of emphasize. And when you read the verse, some of them you'll go, oh yeah, that's something I really want to remember. Give thanks. So I wrote that one in a more script font. And in the Old Testament, when the word Lord is capitalized, that means it was translated from God's name, Yahweh. So I always capitalize it then when I'm doing my final art piece. And then I always capitalize pronouns for God. And sometimes, I'll use like the capital H and then a smaller E. Sometimes I'll do the whole thing in capital letters, depending on how it seems to work with the rest of the piece. And then I wanted to use script font for good and mercy. And then for the word forever, I actually did it with a little bit more a stretched out font. Yes, it's cursive, but instead of just writing it kind of with the normal spacing I usually would, I worked on spacing that or stretching it out because I like the way that doing that kind of makes that word feel more expansive, which is the way I think of the word forever, right? Because forever is forever. And so I do like to extend, if the word is everlasting or forever, I often do like to make that word a little more stretched out just because I like it that way, but you can do what you would like in yours. And so when you do these little thumbnails, you can practice that if you want. You can just focus on the layout and where you want to put things. But if you want to take this time, whether you want to just circle the words that you want to do with different fonts, you can do that, or you can change up the size. So tip number 1 is to use this graph paper. Tip number 2 is if you do get a little thumbnail that you really, really like how it turned out, you can actually just grab your camera, take a photo of it, and then enlarge it, print it, and then trace that onto a larger piece of paper. And a lot of artists do thumbnails just for laying out their composition. We'll do tiny little pictures or drawing sketches of something that we're planning to do in a larger version, but we get to kind of play with the composition and figure out how things are going to work out in a very small space, which is way easier to work with, way less risk, and then we can turn that into a larger painting. And so it can be helpful to even just take a photo of your thumbnail in art or lettering and enlarge that. The benefit of using a camera is that you can skip tip number 3 and go straight to tip number 4, which is tracing. And that just saves a little bit of time rather than having to lay everything out again if you're really, really happy with your thumbnail. My next tip is to take your graph paper and draw a grid on there using the guidelines that the graph paper is already providing you and a ruler. And so what I'll do is I will create some spacing, figure out how many spaces or whatever, how many rows I want for each line of printing or writing. In this case, I've done every 3 rows, but there's no reason you can't do every 4 or every 2, however many, or 5, whatever works for you. And then I will do one in the center, and then maybe about 2 inches to either side, I will do another line. And I'm doing all these lines in pen because I want them to not erase. I'm going to be erasing the letters as I work. I end up having to kind of rework them, move things around, because I really want to try and get them as centered as I can, right? And so you'll want to make sure that these are in pen, unless you want to have to keep drawing them on there, but I would do them in pen, and then I would go ahead and just play with your letters in pencil, erase as many times as you have to, and you'll be able to get a centered layout that you're happy with. Now, my last tip is to trace. You've probably already figured that out looking at this going, well, I don't want my final piece on graph paper. What I do is I follow the tracing technique I've showed you in a couple other videos. I'll include a link for them in the description below so you can watch them. But basically, it just involves taking a piece of graphite paper, my piece of watercolor paper. So what I did is I had a plain blank sheet of watercolor paper. I lay it down first. I put the dirty side of the graphite paper down on that. Then I center my lettering, and I just go ahead and trace the words, nothing else. Of course, I don't trace my grid, just the words. And then when I lift everything up, I've got my verse on the piece of paper that I want. And in this case, I'm using watercolor paper because I'm going to show you how I'm going to add some artwork to it. So for today's project, I'm going to go over this with watercolor pencil. Then I'm going to show you how you can use faux calligraphy to add an extra touch to this. It's super easy, super fun. So what I'm going to do to start with is just go over the whole thing and trace. Now I'm using a watercolor pencil for this, but there's no reason you can't use a regular colored pencil or a graphite pencil or even a pen. The only reason I'm going to use my watercolor pencil is just because I'm planning to use this for the rest of the project. But I don't know that I'm going to be wetting or blending, so like I say, any pen or pencil will do. Once you do that, you can go ahead and erase your extra pencil lines. And the graphite will come off easier than the watercolor pencil will, and so you can just quickly go over that with a kneadable eraser and get rid of the extra graphite. Now, if you'd like to add an extra touch to your writing, you can do faux calligraphy. So to do that, you're going to thicken the downstroke sections of each letter. I'll explain this better on a scrap of paper. If you were doing any letter, say a letter O or whatever it is, let's just do a circle. And just pretend that that's a clock. And when you are going around the circle of the O, usually, as you know, when you do an O, you're coming counterclockwise, right? And so on your downstroke, that's where you're going to go thick. And you're going to, at the 12, let's say the 12 o'clock mark and the 6 o'clock mark, is where you want to be transitioned from the thick to the thin. So you can see I'm kind of almost not even thick yet at 12, but I very quickly get thick. And then as I come down to the 6, I get thin again. And so you're going to be thinking about that with each letter. As you transition from the thick section to the thin section, you're going to do that transition at the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock. And it's always going to be thicker on your downstroke. So let's go over here and quickly do the word give thanks. So my downstroke is thicker. I made a little slop there. And then downstroke here. So I'm taking as many passes as I need to on that downstroke section to get it to be thicker. And where you add your thickness on your letter can be totally dependent on where you feel like you have the most space for the thickness. So in this case, things were a little bit tight between the G and the I. And so I kind of made my thicker section on the right side of the I. Sometimes you can do a little bit of both. So with the V, maybe I'm going to, again, I'm going up and down. I don't want to confuse you. Almost as if you were just doing regular handwriting. If you were taking only one stroke, you'd come down like this, right? So that would be where your downstroke is. And then woo, try and get a better transition. A little sloppy transition I did on the V there, but okay. So then if you were coming around on your E, your downstroke would be here, right? So again, I'm taking several passes to get it thick enough. If you can do it all in one pass, that's good. But I tend to do more than one pass just so I get a little thicker, but I will show you how you can do it in one pass and even one stroke in a minute here. Now you can decide which words you want to emphasize with this technique. You don't have to do all of them. Why don't we do Lord? Now I'm going to show you how you could do the thick and thin technique all in one pass if you would like to. So this takes a little bit more thought as you trace, but let's see how it goes. So I'm going thin strokes up, and then I'm going to put more pressure on my pencil as I come down. Then I'm going to put less pressure as I come up. Stay with less pressure. Now I'm going to go heavy pressure because I'm coming down and I'm coming up with thin pressure. Now this part of the O I could thicken. O's are kind of optional where, you know, you have that extra loop. You can decide if you want to thicken that or not. Down, thick. And when you're going straight across horizontally, you're going to stay thin. Down, thick. Up, thin. Again, I'm coming up and then down. Down, up. So I'm trying to make that transition smooth when I hit that transition. So I'm at the top of my E, so I got to start transitioning. Down, and now start transitioning thin. Down, thin, down, and thin. You can see the word forever is not as pronounced in terms of the darks or the lights. You could definitely go over it with a second pass if you want, or if you just like that really fine, delicate, thin, thick change, you could just do that. And then again, always clean. And you can always go in there afterwards and clean things up. Ooh, I just created a little bit of a streak. I'm going to grab a slightly stronger eraser to get that out of there. It's almost gone. It's still showing just a tiny bit. Be careful as you erase. Sometimes it can streak. You can always do a little bit more of a dabbing motion with your kneadable eraser, and that should help prevent the smudges. I went a little bit too wild there. Might go in and just thicken the thick sections just a smidge, but I don't know, I kind of like the delicate look on this word, so I'm not going to go too crazy. Thinking I might do the same thing to Mercy. I feel like I need just one more word with some thick and thin. So my downstroke, and one more downstroke. I might do a little bit to this H to create some balance. And there we have our lettering. If you would like to see how I go about adding watercolor pencil art to my scripture writing, you'll want to check out this video where I guide you step by step through my process. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that it's encouraged your heart with fresh gratitude, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye.